I'll be completely honest here. I'm not always the sharpest tool in the shed. I miss obvious things or don't pick up on clues. I mean, just ask some of the people that I've dated. But recently, I have absolutely fallen in love with mystery games. There's something so wonderful about a well-crafted story that leads to a satisfying reveal. I think the first game that really gave me that experience was last year's Blueprints, a game that I have raved on and on about already, so I won't really get into it now, but what that game gave me is an urge to pick up other mysteries. The Séance of Blake Manor stuck out to me because it had a very similar art style to Blueprints, and it was published by the same publisher, and was even bundled together with Blueprints on Steam. Obviously, you could see why I was captivated. And while I went in hoping for a game that was just like Blueprints, I'm actually very happy that it wasn't. Blake Manor plays like reading an Agatha Christie novel, mixed with a bit of Shirley Jackson through the lens of Irish mythology. If that description doesn't intrigue you, well then I don't know if this will be the game for you, but I'll just keep going and you can make up your mind after the review. In Blake Manor, you play as Declan Ward, a detective called to Blake Manor in the west of Ireland after the disappearance of one Evelyn Dean, a notable magician. On October 31st, Blake Manor is to be home to a seance, but not just any seance. The medium Carmela Montavani promises to have a spirit speak for the first time ever. The seance has brought an eclectic cast of characters to the manor, including other mystics, skeptics, onlookers, and of course, some folk who are against the idea of a seance altogether. And that's all I'm going to give you in terms of the story, because it really is a game that needs to be experienced, and me telling you beat for beat what happens in the game would probably take away from the experience that the developers intended. What I will say though, and one thing I actually loved about this game, is that there isn't just one mystery. There are many, many mysteries to solve, all laced around the disappearance of Evelyn Dean, what's happened to her, and could someone at the manor possibly be involved? The different mysteries all flow in a really natural way, with no right or wrong order to solve them, although some are blocked until certain beats in the main story, or until other mysteries have been investigated. That's one thing I really loved about the game, the way the mysteries mingle with each other, or even the ways that they're sometimes solitary from the overall plot. It makes the world feel alive. As in any good mystery, every character has their own life, their own reasons to be at the manor, and their own reasons to potentially harbor some feelings about Miss Dean, which you, as the player, have the joy to investigate by talking to them, discussing pieces of evidence, and simply investigating the manor itself, which has a long history. Speaking of history, the game goes to great lengths to get you involved not only in the plot of the game, but in the real-life history and mythology of Ireland. It can be very hard to make history entertaining if you're not someone who typically enjoys that subject. I know personally I always struggled with history in school. I had a hard time focusing on names and dates, and an especially hard time remembering those names and dates when it came time for a test. Blake Manor actually kind of pulls off the impossible for me. They made me actually pay attention and learn. Not only that, they made me take interest outside of the game as well, and I've been reading more on Irish mythology in my free time because it's truly fascinating. If anything, I have to give the devs some huge credit for that. Now, if it were just a plain old mystery game, it wouldn't be all that hard. Instead, you're given the wrinkle of a strict time limit to work with. From the time you arrive at Blake Manor, you have 2 days to solve the main mystery, as well as all of the individual mysteries. Each action you take, every time you read a book, ask someone a question, or participate in an activity, you spend precious minutes that count down until the time of the seance on Halloween night. Frankly, at first I was slightly worried that I wouldn't have enough time to do everything needed. There's a large cast of characters and so many things you can interact with that take up all of your minutes. But by the time I'd actually reached the end of the game, I had several hours left that I needed to actually wait through. And I think that's actually a good thing, because it allows the player to play at their own pace and explore those random books and newspapers to pick up on random tidbits of history. But you also can't really be complacent and waste too much time because you might get screwed over later down the line. I really like the minute system. It kind of reminds me slightly of the step system from Blueprints, which also puts a limit on your exploration and makes every choice more meaningful. If I were to go back and play the game again, which I'm actually tempted to do to round out a few achievements for that 100% completion, I would definitely spend some more time exploring the nooks and crannies of the game, things that aren't as important to the main story but they fill out the world. Blake Manor has this massive library full of books for you to read, and as you play through the game, you actually unlock new research topics that don't necessarily provide you with any strictly important information, but once again, it just makes the world feel like a living place. So far, I've been praising the game, and I do want to restate that I absolutely enjoyed my time, but there were a few things that became slightly tiresome to deal with. One of the big ones was the insane amount of backtracking and running from room to room that needed to be done throughout the game. Blake Manor is nice enough to provide you with a very organized journal that keeps your information easily accessible, but sometimes the people you need to talk to are not accessible. Every hour in-game, every single character has the chance to move to a different place. It isn't random, but if you don't know where they're going, it can be a pain to run around to every single room again looking for them. The game tries to remedy this by letting you ask or sleuth out people's schedules, and while that does help with some broad strokes, oftentimes there are still gaps in the day where you just don't know people's locations. On the one hand, it might be too easy if you already knew where everyone was, but it also just feels like a time sink, especially with the size of the map and having to go so many places just to find one NPC. I feel like there could be a better balance. For the most part, the mysteries were also very intuitive. One piece of evidence would give you the insight to answer your next question. However, there were two very specific pieces of evidence that I think were a little bit obtuse, and made solving their respective characters' stories a bit too hard. And what made one of them even worse is that you needed that one specific piece of evidence to solve two mysteries that were tied together. I think, and especially in that case, that it really came down to the fact that I already knew the answer to what I needed, but the game wouldn't let me progress the mystery without a very specific piece of evidence in a room completely unrelated to anything I was doing. I don't want to let that take away from the game too much, and maybe others found the whole game to be a breeze, but for those two, technically 3 mysteries, they stood out to me because of it. The one other thing that I think is worth noting is that the game had some definite performance issues at times. As someone who has never made a game, I can't speak to it with any technical authority, but it felt like the game wasn't optimized in certain ways. There were basic hallways where the game would suddenly get very laggy for a few seconds, and other times when objects would just turn invisible when looking at them from a certain angle. Like, I know this is a spooky game, but maybe the textures shouldn't turn into ghosts too? And this is a bit personal to me because I was streaming through the game, but every time I went through a door, it would lag my system, causing my stream to lag. I don't know what the reason for that was. Like, it shouldn't have taken up that much processing power to just load the next zone. It's not a very graphics intensive game or anything, but for some reason every single door caused that problem, and I'm not sure what that was. Even with those minor downsides though, I found the Séance at Blake Manor to be a straight up joy to play. It beautifully balanced mystery and horror in a way that was supernatural but also tied to the spiritual history of Ireland. There were tons of heartfelt moments and some beautiful stories that were all tied up by the end of the game with a fairly satisfying conclusion, and that's really all I can ask for in a mystery. So if you, like me, are hankering for a fun mystery game, then I highly recommend checking out the Séance of Blake Manor. It took me around 15 hours to finish, which felt like a pretty good length for the whole thing, and it didn't leave me hanging in the end. Thank you so much for watching the review. If you're someone who likes to read things more than watching them or listening to them, I post these full reviews over on my website, andydoesthings.wordpress.com. There'll be a link in the description. You can read those reviews there. Every time I post one of these, I'll also post basically the script as a review on my website. Yeah. If you like these reviews, check out my others. I've just kind of started doing these as I've been finishing games up this year. I did Borderlands 4 last month. I got this now, and then I'll keep doing them as I finish more and more games. We'll have a nice collection of reviews. But until next time, I'm working on other projects right now as well. They'll get done at some point. So stay tuned. Yeah. Peace out.